Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Now, much of the reporting on harmful side effects related to the products marketed as COVID vaccines has concentrated on young men and heart conditions like myocarditis. But a review of Pfizer's own data makes clear that across the board, in relation to multiple adverse effects, it has been women who have taken the brunt of the harms. Joining me now is journalist Sonia Elijah, who has conducted in-depth research to understand the scale of the problem. Sonia, thank you.
Thank you.
Such an important topic, an overlooked topic. What exactly is it that you have found out from reading that available data?
Yes. So really, for the past 2 years, I've been going through data that really the regulators don't want the public to see, the government doesn't want the public to see, and the pharmaceutical companies don't want the public to see. I've extensively gone through thousands of documents of the Pfizer data dump that was released via court order because the FDA wanted the public to wait till 2096. I've also analysed a recent EU safety update report that was released by the Freedom of Information Act, and it's really damning, the data that I've found. Across the board, you've seen women 3 times more affected. So 3 times more of these cases were reported of women.
So for every young man who's affected by myocarditis or similar, there's 3 women are affected by other things and the same thing?
Yes. So, for example, anaphylaxis, you're looking at 8 times more affected by women. This was in the a report I analysed over a year ago. But this recent EU report, you've got over 327,000 cases. A case is an individual, and over 1.1 million adverse events. So you've got, on average, 1 individual suffering from at least 3 to 4 adverse events. A third of the cases were classified as serious, and at least 84% of those cases, there was no history of comorbidity. Now, going back to the women, there was a section on menstrual disorders, and so the regulator, the European Medicines Agency, was responding to BioNTech and asking for an evaluation report because of the number of queries relating to menstrual disorders. The conclusion was, it's because women are possibly more affected because of the pandemic, and it's all stress related. That was what they concluded. The actual evaluation was in an appendix, which they didn't release, so I couldn't analyse that. But we know that year, the British Medical Journal published a study where they had 30,000 reports of women with menstrual abnormalities after the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine. The following year later, in a journal called Vacunus, 78,000 reports by women, 52% had suffered from menstrual abnormalities. So it's happening, the data is real.
And why do you think, given how many women are being affected in this way, that this hasn't been reported at all? You know, there's been a certain amount here on GB News, especially, we've gone to some lengths to talk about adverse effects like myocarditis. But all of this relating to women and gynecological problems and menstrual disorder, why is it not out there in the general conversation?
It's really shocking that it has. I mean, literally only recently the MHRA updated their website. This is February. This is very new, where they said there is a possible association with menstrual abnormalities and the COVID-19 vaccines, the Pfizer and Moderna's vaccine. So it's taken them so many months to just sort of formally kind of maybe acknowledge, well, maybe there's something going on here, when we have so much observational data going on. And then also there was a paper done, published the end of last year, where by a leading obstetrician in America, and you have astounding data. They compared the flu shot, which has been around for 25 years, with the COVID-19 vaccines, and you have the number count, so 200 times more menstrual disorders. There's a huge increase in miscarriage rates. This is going on.
57-fold.
Yeah, it's shocking. It's really shocking. I also want to put out that looking through the Pfizer clinical trial data, no genotoxicity studies were ever done, no reproductive toxicity studies were ever done, no carcinogenicity studies were ever done, and they weren't planning on doing them. And the reason they said that was, because it's not deemed necessary. I mean, it's just so shocking.
Now, bear with me. Joining me next is my next guest, Dr. David Strain, who's a senior clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School. Hello, Doctor. We've spoken before. in related subjects here. Thank you for joining me. How do you react listening to these findings and these figures that journalist Sonia Elijah is quoting?
Actually, a big part of that is not a surprise. When it comes to these menstrual irregularities, that is actually very common with any sort of inflammatory response. We do expect some degree of menstrual irregularities after any inflammatory things such as the vaccine. And actually, it has now been backed up by fully systematic randomized studies where they...
I'd just like to actually interrupt the doctor there.
Dr. Strain, can I just let Sonia wants to ask a question directly there?
The paper that Dr. James Thorpe and actually Dr. Peter McCullough co-wrote, they compared the COVID-19 vaccines with the flu shot. And they looked at 25 years of data, and in the past 2 years, you've got the COVID-19 coming out, and it's astronomical, the increase in adverse effects affecting women with menstrual disorders, miscarriages, stillbirths. I mean, it's really shocking. So I do not believe that, it's just a side effect of any vaccine. That's incorrect.
But back to you, Dr. Strain.
The first is that any inflammatory thing will give you these changes in the menstrual cycle. Then there's Dr. Thorpe's paper. Now, as you rightly point out, Dr. Thorpe's paper was looking at a numerical difference. So it was looking at the difference in the number of problems with menstrual issues from the flu vaccine compared to the COVID vaccine. And actually, a 200-fold increase is not a surprise when you consider who actually gets the vaccine. We don't give flu vaccines to people under the age of 50 in the UK. And therefore, spotting menstrual issues, spotting issues with miscarriages in people over the age of 50, they're just not going to be reported because we don't get menstrual issues in people over the age of 50. We don't get miscarriages, or rarely get miscarriages in people over the age of 50 just because they're not getting it. We've then given the COVID vaccines to a whole range of people, right down to 18, and in some places we've given it to children. Now, you will see problems in the menstrual cycle in a population that is actually menstruating, and that's the big issue with Dr. Thorpe's paper.
But Dr.
I don't want to minimize the fact that the menstrual cycles are being deranged in people who have the vaccine. On average, it's about 3 days changes. On average, if you get, you will have a slightly heavy period the time afterwards.
David, David, if I can just butt in, if I can just butt in there, why, when the disease we're talking about poses very little threat to the women that we're talking about, why, in terms of a risk-benefit judgment, continue to offer that vaccination to women when there are at least these doubts raised by these figures? Why would you continue to recommend this vaccine to women, to pregnant women and the rest, seeing the shadow of doubt that must at least be raised by this kind of research?
So the latest range of boosters for the vaccines wasn't open to people under the age of 50. It was only open to people in particularly high-risk groups where the risk was substantially greater than the benefit. And this is amongst many of the reasons why the latest range of boosters wasn't offered to people under the age of 50. We are still in this process that we are learning both about the virus and about the treatments for it. And at the moment, we're in a position where the risk to benefit is not in favour of boosting people under the age of 50, and that's why they weren't invited. When it comes to pregnant women, however, pregnancy is itself its own risk factor, and that's a very detailed conversation that you need to have with the obstetrician when it comes to whether you'd like to be vaccinated or not and what your individual...
Dr. Davidson, I just want to let Sonia's keen to interject.
Yeah, I just want to talk about pregnancy outcomes. So there was a study by Pinellas et al., and where it was, so women who were pregnant actually had favoured better when they contracted COVID-19. They were not at higher risk. So any claim that women who are pregnant are at high risk of morbidity with COVID-19, that's an unsubstantiated claim. I looked through the clinical trial documents of Pfizer, post-authorization data. There were 270 pregnancy cases, and 238 were unknown. So out of the 32 that were known, 23 resulted in miscarriage. That's damning data, and people do not know.
Dr. Strain, is it good enough, really, to be saying that you're aware that we are aware of this kind of adverse effect, and just to move on from it and say, oh well, we're not doing that anymore? Is that good enough when you're up against this kind of 200-fold increase in these kind of effects in certain circumstances? To just move on and say, oh well, that's just been unfortunate and what you might have expected.
So the first thing is that 200-fold figure is a complete misrepresentation of figures. It's like saying that there's an infinity-fold increase in menstrual problems in women compared to men. When we were comparing flu vaccines in people over the age of 50 and COVID vaccines in people who are still menstruating, there was bound to be a massive numerical difference. We then have to consider the different environment we're in at the time. When we first started giving the vaccine, we were still in a position where people were dying on a daily basis.
Dr. Strain, I'm going to run out of time here. So, thank you once again for your contribution to this intense debate, Sonia Elijah. Thank you so much.